So Helldivers 2 just released their latest update and their 60-day plan to buff everything in the game, and with this update came a ton of great changes. Now I saw some of you guys asking why we didn't do a patch note video, and that's because Arrowhead has been posting their own patch note videos, and honestly they're way better than anything we could come up with in a short amount of time. They go in great detail about every single change in the update, so I figured instead of making patch note videos, as long as Arrowhead continues to make their patch note videos, I'm just going to focus all of my time into these testing videos instead because these take forever to make. So if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you go and check out Arrowhead's patch note video because it explains everything in this update in great detail and they did a really great job. Now for today's video, I tested out everything in the latest update and I'm going to give you my thoughts on some of the standout changes. Now I'm not going to go over every single little detail of this patch because there's just so much to go over, so I'm just going to go over a lot of the major changes that were in this update, and then since this video is going to be a bit longer, as always, you will find timestamps down in the description and they will be at the bottom of your video, so if there's a specific weapon or change from this update that you want to skip ahead to, you could do so. So with that said, let's jump right into it, starting with the Plas 101 Purifier. So with the Plas 101 Purifier, projectiles can now be charged up with a damage multiplier that scales. It has a minimum charge time of 0.1 seconds, which gives a 50% damage multiplier, and then a maximum charge of 1 second that gives a 100% damage multiplier. The maximum charge projectile damage was increased from 100 to 200, the maximum charge projectile durable damage was increased from 50 to 100, the maximum charge explosion damage was increased from 150 to 300, and then they went on to say that the explosion damage doesn't scale, but a fully charged shot has a different explosion effect. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of this change to this weapon because before this update, this weapon was pretty pathetic. Nobody used this weapon because, let's be honest, it just straight up sucked. It was not very good. And now the weapon feels like I originally envisioned when I first saw this weapon announced. This weapon is honestly a ton of fun now because before this update, you couldn't fight anything that got up in your face. Anytime something got up in your face, you would basically just blow yourself up with the explosion damage. And now that it has a minimum charge time of 0.1 seconds, you can basically just spam fire this thing and make it pretty much full auto. Especially if you're using mouse and keyboard, as fast as you click is as fast as this weapon will shoot, which is pretty cool. And it does still shoot pretty quickly with a controller. I mainly use a controller in my gameplay. That's just how I like to play, and I was able to just rapid fire the crap out of this thing, which is really good at wrecking some of those smaller enemies. Now, as for the fully charged shot, it is also extremely powerful, and believe it or not, this is probably one of my go-to weapons against the Terminids now. This is really good for bug breaches and stuff, where there's a ton of enemies clustered up into one spot. That explosion damage will take out like 5 or 6 enemies every single shot. It's really, really fun. I was doing some of those defense missions and I was just firing into the smoke, just racking up the kills. And it's also really good against the automatons as well. It does a great job at taking out Devastators and stuff. You can take out Devastators in just a couple of fully charged shots, and honestly, it kind of melts through them like butter. And it can even two-shot gunships now, so if you hit the same thruster twice, it's going to take out a gunship, which is pretty cool. And it can also four-shot bot cannons and bot tanks if you shoot them in the heat vents. So if you sneak up on a tank and shoot it from behind, you're going to very quickly take out a tank, which is pretty cool. So before this update, I was not a fan of this weapon. I would have probably given it like F tier. It was awful. And now after this update, it shot clear up to A tier, maybe even S tier. I haven't tested it enough fully yet, but I can already tell in my limited testing that it's just way better, and it's overall just a way more fun weapon to use. So if you were maybe holding off on getting the War Bond because you saw that this weapon sucked, now it's actually worth getting. So next up is the Plas 1 Scorcher. It also got some changes because they didn't want to make the Purifier way better than the Scorcher. So this weapon has a new weapon function. It fires in full auto mode. The fire rate was increased from 250 to 350. The magazine capacity was increased from 15 to 20, and the spare magazines were decreased from 6 to 5. And the Scorcher was a good weapon before this update. It was probably one of the go-to weapons when facing the automatons. It was never really that good against the Terminids since it's just so awful with ammo. And after this update, the ammo is still honestly kind of a problem. Increasing the magazine capacity from 15 to 20 doesn't make that big of a difference since the rate of fire was also increased. If you fire this thing in full auto, it does absolutely shred through enemies. So, I mean, it does a good amount of damage. It's just the ammo economy with this weapon is awful. I recommend maybe running it with the supply backpack in case you are running low on ammo. But if you switch to the single fire mode, you can kind of manage it a little bit better. And overall, I do like the changes that they made to the Scorcher, and you know, I don't really have any complaints. They did make the weapon better. It's just ammo is still going to be a bit of an issue. So next up is the SG-8P Punisher Plasma. Now they reduced the recoil on this weapon and the fire rate got increased from 80 to 100. Now that is all that they said got changed in the patch notes, but this weapon feels completely different. I feel like there was some secret like stealth nerfs that happened to this weapon because I am not a big fan of this Punisher Plasma at all after this update. I don't know what they were trying to go for, but it feels awful. The range on this weapon has been significantly nerfed. So if you're trying to like lob your shots, the drop off that these plasma balls have is insane. If you're trying to hit anything past, I don't know, 50 meters, the ball is going to straight up just drop, and it makes it almost impossible to lob your shots. Before this update, this weapon felt like the little plasma balls just hit really hard and did a big amount of damage, and now it feels like you shoot more balls more often and they don't do as much damage, and this weapon feels a lot weaker, and I'm not a big fan of this change. I hope that they either go back and change this weapon back to the way it was, or I hope they give it an alternate firing mode. That way you can either shoot these fast plasma balls that have a short drop off, or you could switch to maybe some heavy plasma balls that can be lobbed a lot farther, but it has a slower rate of fire. But overall, I was not a fan of this change to the Punisher Plasma. So next up is some of the assault rifles. A lot of them got changed, and the horizontal recoil got reduced by a lot of them by 30%. So a lot of the assault rifles are going to be a lot more accurate now. The AR-23 Liberator got changed. Its horizontal recoil was reduced by 30, and that's the only change that the weapon received, so it is going to be more accurate. The AR-23P Liberator Penetrator also got its horizontal recoil reduced by 30%, but they also increased the magazine capacity from 30 to 45, and the spare magazines decreased from 10 to 7. And I gotta say, the increased magazine capacity from 30 to 45 makes a huge difference for this weapon. I always thought that the Liberator Penetrator was just kind of okay, but something was holding it back, and it was definitely the magazine size. So now that they buffed it by 15 shots, it feels like a completely different weapon. This weapon feels very powerful since it has medium armor penetration, so you can just melt through the armor of some of those bigger, thicker Terminids, and you can also very easily wreck Devastators and stuff by shooting them in the face. So if at any point you were a fan of the Liberator Penetrator and you put it on the shelf, definitely get it off the shelf because it is a lot better now. So next up is the AR-23A Liberator Carbine. Now, the horizontal recoil was reduced by 30. The ergonomics was increased from 65 to 70, so it has a little bit better handling now. And then the reload duration was decreased from 3 to 2.5 seconds, so it's a little bit faster to reload. And this weapon's okay. I mean, it got a buff, so it's obviously better than it was previously. It's good in a quick pinch, like if you need a quick burst. I definitely found it was better against the Terminids, just because you have a lot of small little bugs that like to get up in your face. It's really good at taking out hunters and stuff that are leaping at you. It's not as good against the automatons since it doesn't have any medium armor penetrating or anything. So you have to be extremely accurate when you're trying to take out Devastators and stuff. You have to hit them directly in the face, otherwise you're going to just burn through your ammo. But I am a fan of this change, especially against the Terminids. I was having a lot of fun just absolutely wrecking stuff, and then being able to reload very quickly is pretty nice. So I definitely recommend the AR-23 Liberator when you're going up against the Terminids now. Next up is the BR-14 Adjudicator. It also got that horizontal recoil reduction. The projectile damage was increased from 80 to 90. The projectile durable damage was increased from 16 to 23, and the magazine capacity was increased from 25 to 30. Now on paper, the Adjudicator definitely got a buff, but in my testing, it honestly feels the same as it did before the update. Like, I didn't really have too many complaints with the Adjudicator. I thought it was one of the best assault rifles in the game, and it's still one of the best assault rifles in the game. It just, to me, it feels the same as it did. I don't know why that is, but most of these other weapons on this list felt and played differently in some way, shape, or form, but for some reason the Adjudicator just kind of feels the same. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's nice to see that it got that magazine capacity increased to 30 shots, so those 5 extra shots make a little bit of a difference, I guess, but honestly, you kind of just burn through your ammo so quickly with this weapon that, you know, it's not that big of a deal. Next up is the AR-61 Tenderizer. All they added here was a new weapon function, so you can increase the RPMs from 600 to 850, so it has 2 different firing modes, and that's pretty cool to see on a primary weapon. I wish more of the primary weapons in the future would get new weapon functions like this, because this is pretty cool to use, and it's super fun to just crank this thing up to 850 RPM, and it basically just shoots like a laser beam. You burn through your ammo pretty much instantly. That's the only downside. So it's good in quick bursts. If something's charging at you and you need to quickly take it out, this is good for that situation. But I just found myself burning through my ammo like crazy when I was using this weapon function. It basically turns the Tenderizer into like a mini Stalwart or something, except you only have a certain amount of shots. You don't have over 200 shots like you do in the Stalwart. So just be careful and keep that in mind if you're going to be using the Tenderizer. So next up are the sidearms. The P113 Verdict got a buff. The armor penetration was increased from 2 to 3. The projectile durable damage was increased from 13 to 32. And then the stagger strength was increased from 13 to 15. And overall, this was a pretty good buff. It does a great job at taking out bugs. Anytime there's Terminids coming at you, you do have some armor penetration, so you can just go straight through their armor and blow off their heads. I found it was good at taking out the nursing spewers and the bile spewers if you shoot them in the face. It's really great at taking on automatons. If you have a bunch of devastators and you're accurate, you can just pop them in the face and take them out in just 1 to 2 shots. There's a couple different times where I took out multiple devastators just back to back, and I don't have any complaints with this weapon. If you're ever out of ammo in your primary and you need to quickly switch to your sidearm, the P13 Verdict is good for pretty much every situation. And then next up is the P4 Senator, and this is probably one of the biggest changes in the entire update. People are just going crazy over this weapon. If you look at Reddit and stuff, there's just tons of memes about this now. But they changed the armor penetration. It got increased from 3 to 4. The projectile damage was increased from 175 to 200. The projectile durable damage was increased from 35 to 70. And this sidearm is insane now. It can blow the asses off of Bile Titans. I've seen some clips online where people have shot Bile Titans in the face and it's killed them in the face. It can kill chargers. There's been a couple times where I've shot the ass off of a charger, or I've just stun locked a charger with the stun grenades, and you can just blow the armor straight off the leg of a charger and kill it pretty quickly. It can also kill the chargers pretty quickly by shooting them in the face, which is pretty cool. But that's not all. This thing can also take down gunships now. Yeah, it can take down a gunship out of the sky if you keep shooting the same thruster over and over. That's pretty crazy. And my favorite thing that the Senator can now kill are the Hulks. There was a bunch of different times where I was able to kill a Hulk in just 3 shots to the eye, which is insane. Hulks are one of the most dangerous things that the automatons have, so hitting them with a quick stun grenade, popping them in the eye 3 times, and watching them die is pretty awesome. So the P4 Senator is absolutely busted right now. It feels really fun to use, and honestly, you could probably run around using this as a primary weapon if you run it with the supply backpack. That way you don't run out of ammo. It does have that drawback of having a slow reload speed, so make sure you burn through all 6 of your shots before you reload. Otherwise, you have to reload 1 shot at a time, and it takes forever. But I feel like that's a pretty good trade-off. You have a very slow reload speed, but you do a ton of damage. Now, who knows if they nerf this in the future? I've actually seen some people on Reddit talk about it needing a nerf, but if there's people actually bringing up that a weapon needs nerfed, then, you know, that tells you how good a weapon actually is now. But if you haven't yet, go test this out for yourselves, and I think you're going to have a ton of fun with it. It is absolutely busted. Next up is the P11 Stim Pistol. The spread got decreased from 30 to 5, and the muzzle velocity was increased from 80 to 200. So the Stim Pistol is going to shoot a lot faster and more accurate, and the Stim Pistol is kind of just, it's still the Stim Pistol. I think it still sucks. It's not that good. You have to shoot your teammate multiple times to get them to full health. If they're low on health, you still can't stim yourself, and until you're able to like stim yourself or they buff that stimming effect, I'm not going to be rocking the Stim Pistol that often. I don't know. It's not for me. If you like to play the support role and help your teammates and run around and maybe use the medic class so you get more stims, you're definitely going to see a difference, and I think you're going to have more fun with the Stim Pistol. I still think it needs some changes, though. So next up, let's talk about all the different throwables that got changed in this update. Starting with the K2 throwing knives, and they got an increase in their capacity from 8 to 20. And honestly, I'm still not impressed with the throwing knives. They still feel pretty gimmicky. To me, the throwing knives are super inaccurate. They never go where my reticle is. I will throw like 3 or 4 knives at an enemy that's standing still, and I cannot hit them. I basically have to overcompensate and aim a little to the right of an enemy, that way the knife actually hits them. And the knives, it's nice having 20 of them, and if you have that special armor that gives you extra throwables, you can have 22 of them, and it's just not nearly as good as any of the other grenades or something. I mean, it's fun to run around and kind of just hit things in the face with throwing knives. Like if you're facing up against the Terminids, you can kind of just one-shot kill most of the smaller Terminids, which is fun to do. It's just like, why am I going to use 20 different throwing knives and one knife equals maybe 1 kill, so at the most I can get 20 kills, versus I could just throw 2 grenades and get 20 kills. It's, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer to me. But the throwing knives are better, they're just still gimmicky, and I don't recommend them. So next up is the G12 High Explosive Grenade. It got a damage increase from 400 to 800, so it's pretty powerful now. I was able to pretty reliably kill chargers with these, so if you manage to get a charger that's standing still and they're a little confused, just throw these underneath the charger and it will make quick work of them. It's also really good at dealing with bug breaches and stuff. If there's a bug breach and there's a lot of bugs coming up, you can just get multiple kills with one grenade. Overall, this definitely makes the grenade a lot better, and now it's one to actually consider bringing. Same with the G6 Frag Grenade. The damage was increased from 250 to 500. This is just the default grenade. I can't really complain too much. I mean, it got a buff. I honestly still wouldn't bring these frag grenades. I mean, they're good at blowing up bug holes in factories and stuff, but there's just so many other better grenades out there that I just don't really see a reason to choose these default frag grenades. I mean, I guess they're good for probably new players, but outside of that, I honestly wouldn't pick these. Then the G10 Incendiary Grenade got a buff from 150 to 300. This buff, I was actually able to tell a pretty big difference. The explosion damage itself is good for when you're trying to throw it into a crowd of bugs. It will just blow them up instantly. Then that fire damage will get you some extra kills. So I was able to go on some pretty big kill streaks just using these grenades. Especially if you like fire builds and you like to go all in on fire, I feel like the G10 Incendiary Grenade is probably the go-to option here now. So I will recommend the G10 Incendiary Grenade. It was kicking a ton of butt for me. So next up, let's talk about the AC-8 Autocannon. It has a new weapon function of programmable ammunition, which now allows you to switch between normal and flak projectiles. And it says that the flak projectiles are proximity-triggered shrapnel explosions with a larger explosion radius. So you want to use the regular autocannon ammo against big targets like chargers or bile titans or hulks and stuff like that. And then if you have larger groups of enemies, you switch to the flak. So if there's a bug breach, you can get some pretty big kill streaks with the flak. Same with the robots. If there's like a robot drop off and there's a bunch of bots in one spot, you can take them all out pretty easily. And what's really good is when you face up against the shriekers, it does a great job of taking out the shriekers in midair. So I'm a big fan of this change. I think they knocked it out of the park with the programmable ammunition. I think that was really smart, and it makes the autocannon even better, and it was already one of the best stratagems in the game. So I definitely like the flak projectiles. I think they're pretty cool. Same thing goes for the GR8 Recoilless Rifle. It also has programmable ammunition, which allows you to switch between normal projectiles and high explosive rounds. Now, the high explosive rounds have a larger explosion radius. They deal more explosion damage, but they have less projectile damage and are less effective against tanks. So you want to use the regular rounds against tanks and hard targets like Bile Titans and stuff. And then if you have a large group of enemies, you want to use the new explosive rounds. And I gotta say, I was getting some pretty big kill streaks with these explosive rounds. These are also really good to use against robot dropships. They're good at bug breaches, and anytime you see large crowds, you're going to get a ton of kills. So I definitely recommend this change as well. These were two really good buffs to already good stratagem. So I was definitely pretty impressed with this change too. Next up was the RL-77 Airburst. It just got a reload reduction from 7 to 5, so that's nice. That's a slight buff there, so can't really complain about that. Next was the M105 LG Stalwart. The ergonomics was increased from 25 to 40, and me and all my friends have said that the Stalwart is like a night and day difference. It is just way better than it was before, and the Stalwart was already one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. I love bringing the Stalwart with me on tournament missions and just holding down the trigger and melting through everything. It is just so much fun to do. And with the increase to the ergonomics, you can sway this weapon back and forth pretty easily. So if there's bugs getting up in your face, you can very quickly pop from one target to the next without having to like fight the sway of the weapon. So if you like the Stalwart before, you're going to really love the Stalwart now. It's really, really good. Same goes for the MG43 machine gun. This is one of my personal favorite changes in this update. The magazine capacity got an increase from 150 to 175, and the starting spare magazines was increased from 1 to 2. So you get a lot more ammo with the MG43 machine gun. So it is so much fun to just sit there and hold down the trigger, and you can spray so many shots, reload, and just keep spraying. This was always kind of like the middle ground machine gun, and I didn't really like it as much as the Stalwart because you have to stop and pause to reload. But now that it has so much more ammo and it hits harder than the Stalwart, this is probably my favorite of the 3 machine guns now. And I just really, really love this change. And this truly feels like you have a support weapon. It really fills that support role well, where you just provide covering fire and do that sort of thing. Which leads me into the next machine gun change, which is the MG206 heavy machine gun. The magazine capacity was increased from 75 to 100. And you could definitely tell the difference here with this weapon as well. This was one of my complaints since this weapon released, was that it just never had enough ammo. I was pretty much begging them, please add more ammo to this weapon, and they finally did, and now the weapon finally feels like it's in a good spot. You could just hold down the trigger and melt through an entire line of automatons. There's a couple different times where I thought I was gonna die because I was surrounded, and I just upped the rate of fire on the heavy machine gun, and I just melted through everything like butter. So if you liked the heavy machine gun before, you're definitely going to like it now, because you know, it's got 25 more shots in it. I still personally like the MG43 machine gun better, but the MG206 heavy machine gun is definitely better than it was before, and I think you guys are going to like this change. So next up are changes to the backpacks. The Lift 850 jump pack got its cooldown reduced from 20 to 15 seconds, and the thrust vector has been tweaked, and you will have a slightly higher jump and more forward momentum. So you can definitely tell a big difference with the jump pack. It is way better than it was before. It's great for making quick escapes. And now that it has an increased thrust force, I found that it's a lot easier to get yourself in certain sniping positions. So I was jumping on top of rocks and the side of cliffs, and I was just trying to get myself in positions where the enemies couldn't reach me, and I found it was a lot easier to do after this update. This is definitely the go-to for those type of players that like to be on the move constantly. And then next up is a big change to the AX/AR-23 guard dog. Now, I've been talking down on this guard dog since launch. Anytime they tweak this thing, I'm like, it's not enough. This guard dog still sucks compared to the laser guard dog in pretty much every way. And now they switched it from an AR-23 Liberator rounds to AR-23P Liberator Penetrator rounds. So the armor penetration was increased from 2 to 3, but the damage was decreased from 70 to 60, and then the magazine capacity was increased from 30 to 45, so it can shoot off more shots before it has to reload. They also made a change to all the drone backpacks, so they now have a toggle function so you can turn them on and off. Just hit down on the D-pad and it will stow away your guard dog. Now, I do wish that this would reload the guard dog when you did this. For some reason, it doesn't reload it. I wish there was a way to manually reload your guard dog. That way, when you're not in combat, you can reload itself, and then you can, summon it, and it can keep shooting. But overall, overall, this is a good change. This guard dog is actually worth bringing now. It's finally on par with the other guard dog rover. I was getting pretty big kill streaks of just letting this thing do kills for me. Like, I could just sit back and it will just go out and kill everything. It's really great against Terminids. It will just wreck through Shriekers and stuff. And since it got that armor penetration buff, it will now melt through enemies that have medium armor. So it does a great job at taking out automaton devastators and stuff now too. And just overall, the guard dog is way better than it was before. And now that the guard dogs have that option that you can turn them off anytime you're running around with your buddies and you don't want to accidentally kill your teammates, you can stow away these guard dogs on your back and you don't have to worry about, accidental deaths. So next up are more changes to some stratagems. Now this wasn't mentioned directly in the patch notes, but I want to bring up smoke, like smoke grenades, smoke orbital strikes, the eagle smoke strike. They made a change to the enemy's line of sight because there was that glitch where enemies would shoot through rocks and stuff. Well, they tweaked the enemy line of sight, so now if an enemy's line of sight is broken, they aren't going to shoot you as much. So this indirectly made smoke a lot better. So I've been using smoke screens on objectives. I've been using smoke screens to drop them on bug breaches and bot drops, and it will just immediately confuse the enemies and it will break their line of sight and then they can't find you. So there was a couple of those flag missions where they're absolutely insane, where there's just endless enemies that spawn over and over when you're trying to capture those flags, and it can be pretty close to impossible when you're playing on Helldive 10. Well, if you drop some smoke on the flag, it confuses some of the enemies and buys you just a little bit of time, which might be enough for you to finally capture that flag. It's also really good at extractions and stuff too, so if you haven't played around with the smoke yet after this update, go test it out. It's a big change and it makes a big difference for me, especially against the automatons. They can't shoot you through the smoke, they kind of just blind fire through it, and that makes a big difference. But next up, let's talk about the Eagle Strafing Run. Its explosion radius was slightly increased and the explosion damage was increased from 250 to 350, and I love the Eagle Strafing Run now. If you have them fully upgraded, you get 5 of them, and it has a pretty quick cooldown, so you can just use these all the time. They're great at closing bug holes now, so if you need to quickly close a bug hole in a pinch, or if you need to blow up an automaton factory, it will blow those up. If there's a large group of enemies heading at you in a straight line, it will just wreck all of them in one go. The Eagle Strafing Run can now one-shot kill impalers, so if you come across an impaler and they have their tentacles down on the ground and their weak spot is exposed, it will just instantly kill them, which is a huge deal. It can take out chargers, and it can even kill Bile Titans if you hit them enough times. It's not going to one-shot kill a Bile Titan, but if you have a few of their weak spots exposed, or if you hit them with multiple strafing runs, you can take out Bile Titans. Overall, the Eagle Strafing Run got a pretty big buff, and it's probably one of the better Eagle Strikes in the game now. It's really, really good. Next up is the Orbital Airburst Strike. The salvos were increased from 3 to 4, but the duration between the salvos was increased from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. So it's going to take a little bit longer for it to go off, but it is going to give you 4 bursts. It's really great for bug breaches, or if you're trying to defend extraction and a bunch of enemies are charging at you. It's just really good at cutting off choke points for enemies. I think there was a slight tweak to the radius that they didn't mention in the patch notes, because it feels like the radius is way bigger than what it was before, and it feels a little bit more inaccurate than it was previously. Before this update, I felt like it had a tighter spread and it would hit your target more often. Now it feels like it has a much wider spread and it's a little bit more accurate. It doesn't hit exactly on the laser beam every single time. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using the Orbital Airburst Strike. So next up are the Sentries, the Gatling Sentry, Rocket Sentry, Autocannon Sentry. They all got slight tweaks where they gave them cooldown reductions from 180 seconds to 150 seconds, and then the lifetime for them was reduced from 180 to 150 as well. So basically, all these Sentries have faster cooldowns, but they have less overall life, so they're not going to stay out as active in the battlefield, but they have way more ammo, so they're less likely to run out of ammo when you're using them in combat. And that was one of the major downsides to using these Sentries, is that they would just run out of ammo way too quickly, and then they didn't really feel like they were worth it. So overall, I feel like all these Sentries got a buff from this change, and they feel way better, and it's really fun to use them a lot more frequently. And then next up are the MD-17 anti-tank mines. They said that they're still working on changes to the anti-personnel and the incendiary mines. However, we are not happy yet with the fixes, as we feel they introduced too many new problems. We will continue working on these changes and include them in a future patch. But for the anti-tank mines, the mines are now only triggered by heavier enemies like Chargers, Bile-Titans, Impalers, and Hulks, and the damage was increased from 800 to 2000, but the explosion radius was decreased. And this is also a great change because you can step on top of these mines and they don't blow up, so you can easily just run through the minefield and have enemies chase you, and then they'll blow up as they're chasing you. Or what I like to do is throw these mines down into like a bug nest or something, gather all the enemies into the minefield, and then I'll like throw a grenade into the minefield and detonate all the mines in one go. Or I'll like throw down a minefield, wait for the enemies to run into the minefield, then I'll hit them with like an Airburst Strike or an Orbital Strike or whatever. It'll instantly detonate all the mines and kill all of them. So it's still usable against the small enemies, you just don't have to worry about accidentally blowing yourself up. That is, unless you're standing next to the mines when you decide to activate them. But this is a great change. This is what people wanted the anti-tank mines to be from the very beginning, and I'm glad they listened to the feedback because now the anti-tank mines are actually worth using. Next up was a buff to the Tesla Tower that reduced the charge-up shots from 3 seconds to 1 second, and then the cooldown time was also reduced from 150 to 120, and then the lifetime was reduced from 180 to 150. So the Tesla Tower is definitely way better. It can shoot shots way more often, so if you throw it near a bug breach, it does a really great job of just spawn camping all the bugs, and it's also really great at shutting off certain choke points. Now, it is still going to be very dangerous to you and your teammates, so just be careful where you throw the Tesla Tower, but it did get a pretty significant buff here, and I like this change. Next up is another one of my favorite changes from this update, and it's the FX Shield Generator Relay. Now, they removed the charge delay between damage taken, they increased the damage rate from 300 to 400, and then the radius got increased from 8 to 15 meters. But the downside is that once the shield is down, it will no longer regenerate. Now, I like to call this the Gungan Shield because you know, that's what it looks like. And I really love this change because the radius is so much bigger. When you're standing inside this giant dome and you can hear the blaster bolts kind of just pinging off the shield, it sounds really cool. And it's really good for when you're defending objectives. There were so many times after this update where I would call this in against the automatons and it would protect me while I was trying to turn on a terminal, or when we're at extraction. It comes in super clutch at extraction now. And I feel like this is a must-have for somebody on your squad when you're facing the automatons. I don't care who it is, as long as one person brings this shield generator, it's going to make life just way easier for your entire team if somebody brings this. So I'm super glad that they decided to make this change because this stratagem is a lot more fun than it was before this update. Then they made a couple changes to like the armor system and stuff. Light armor increases the damage taken by 25% instead of 33%. So it's worded weird in the patch notes, but it got a bit of a buff. Same with the heavy armor. Now there's 5% more damage reduction. So they said that they buffed the heavy armor and the light armor, but I honestly still can't tell much of a difference. Like if I'm running around in light armor and I still get shot by something that would normally kill you, you're still going to die. This little 8% damage difference isn't going to do anything. But one thing that they did change that I really enjoy is that they made it so supply items, so when you call in a resupply, it shows up on the mini-map. Same with your exosuits and any support weapons and stuff, so anything you call in will show up on the mini-map, which is huge. Before this update, not being able to see where a resupply was a pretty big deal. There would be so many times where I'd have 0 stims and my teammate would call in a resupply and I would just miss out on the stims because I didn't know where it was. Well, now after this update, that is easily fixed and you can always know where the supply drops are. So this is a huge change. I really, really love this change. Alright, so that's going to do it for all of the stratagem and primary weapon changes. Now, there was a bunch of random stuff that they also changed, like enemy health pools and stuff like that, but there's not really a good way to show that on screen. Just know that most of the enemies got nerfed in some way, shape, or form. And with all these weapons getting buffed from this update and the previous update, you're just going to have a lot easier time killing most of the enemies. Now, I will say that they made the patrols a lot better now, so once you complete the primary objective and all you have left to do is extract extract. You're not going to find as many patrols when you're wandering around the map trying to like collect samples, but you will see a lot more enemies when you're going to extraction, and that makes it feel a lot better, because when you're trying to extract and you see a million enemies coming your way, it just feels really cool, and it feels like you're doing 2 missions in one. You have like the whole mission itself, and then you have like a little mini defense mission when you're trying to extract, and that's how it should feel. And I really like that change, and it definitely helps with collecting samples a lot easier as well, so I appreciate that. But that is going to do it for my thoughts on everything in this latest update. The standouts to me were the P4 Senator, probably the Autocannon and the Recoilless Rifle, the MG43 machine gun, the giant Gungan shield dome, and probably the Eagle Strafing Run and any use of smoke. All of those things are really great changes, and they made my gameplay experience just way, way better. And I gotta say, they've been knocking it out of the park with these 2 updates, and the game feels just night and day difference. Way, way, way more fun than it did a couple months ago. So if you're a returning player, I think you're definitely going to love this update. And if you're a new player, I'm kind of jealous that you're starting off now and you didn't have to go through all the BS we had to deal with for months and months and months. But that's going to do it for me, guys. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. That way you don't miss out on any future Helldivers 2 videos. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider giving it a thumbs up because it helps me out in the algorithm. And that's going to do it for me, and I will talk to you all in the next video.